Standing in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, I never imagined the small velvet box hidden in my dresser drawer would change everything at Tommy's birthday party. My daughter Sarah had called the night before, her voice sharp with that familiar edge of embarrassment. "Mom, don't bring anything expensive to Tommy's party tomorrow. You know how you are with money." The sting of her words still burned fresh in my chest as I stirred my coffee, watching steam rise like the anger building inside me. For 67 years, I'd lived modestly, saved carefully, and loved deeply. My late husband Robert and I had built a life of quiet dignity, never flaunting our means. Sarah assumed my second-hand clothes and coupon clipping meant poverty. She had no idea about the safety deposit box downtown, the investment accounts, or the family heirloom I'd been saving for this exact moment. If you're dealing with family drama like this, comment below with your city and state so I can see where my story resonates. The irony wasn't lost on me that my own daughter thought I was too poor to contribute meaningfully to her son's special day. Tommy's 7th birthday deserved celebration, not the tension that seemed to follow every family gathering lately. Sarah had married David 3 years ago, a decent man who worked in finance and treated my grandson well. But somewhere along the way, she'd developed expensive tastes that her teacher's salary couldn't support. Designer handbags, luxury cars, private school tuition they could barely afford. She'd started making snide comments about my shabby appearance at family events, suggesting I shop at better stores or invest in my image. Last Christmas, she'd actually asked me to wait in the car during Tommy's school play because my coat was too old-fashioned. The memory still made my hands shake with hurt and frustration. I'd raised her to value substance over surface, kindness over status symbols. Apparently, those lessons had been forgotten somewhere between her college graduation and her marriage into David's upper-middle-class circle. Today would be different, though. Today, I'd remind her that wealth isn't always visible, and love can't be measured by designer labels. The velvet box felt warm in my palm as I pulled it from its hiding place behind my jewelry box. Inside lay my grandmother's sapphire ring, passed down through 4 generations of women in our family. The deep blue stone caught the morning light, surrounded by tiny diamonds that sparkled like captured starlight. Grandmother Rose had worn it on her wedding day in 1922, then passed it to my mother, who gave it to me on my 18th birthday. The ring was worth more than Sarah's car, but its real value lay in the stories it carried, the love it represented, and the legacy it would continue. I'd planned to give it to Sarah when Tommy was born, but she'd been so caught up in her new life, so dismissive of family traditions and old things, that I'd decided to wait. Now, watching my grandson grow up with parents who measured worth in dollar signs, I knew he needed to understand that true value comes from family, history, and the love that connects generations. The ring would be his inheritance, his connection to ancestors he'd never met, but whose strength flowed in his veins. Driving to Sarah's suburban home, I noticed the new landscaping, the fresh paint on their colonial shutters, and the luxury SUV gleaming in the driveway. David's promotion had clearly brought financial improvements, but it seemed to have widened the gap between Sarah's perception of appropriate lifestyle choices and her judgment of mine. I parked my reliable but modest Honda between 2 other expensive vehicles, already feeling the familiar sting of not measuring up to her social standards. Through the large bay window, I could see balloons and decorations, hired entertainment setting up equipment, and caterers arranging elaborate food displays. This wasn't just a birthday party. It was a showcase, a demonstration of success and status. I thought about my own childhood birthdays, simple affairs with homemade cake, backyard games, and relatives crowded around our kitchen table. Those parties had been filled with laughter, stories, and genuine joy. Today felt more like a performance than a celebration. Still, Tommy deserved his special day, and I wouldn't let adult complications diminish his happiness. The velvet box in my purse seemed to pulse with anticipation, carrying decades of love toward its intended recipient. Sarah answered the door wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her smile polite but distant. "Hi, Mom. Thanks for coming early to help set up." She glanced at my simple cardigan and comfortable shoes, with that slight frown I'd come to recognize and dread. Behind her, the house bustled with activity as caterers arranged gourmet appetizers and a party planner directed the placement of expensive decorations. "You can help in the kitchen if you want," she said, already turning away. "Just don't get in the caterer's way." The dismissive tone cut deeper than intended, reducing me to an auxiliary helper at my own grandson's celebration. I followed her inside, noting the new furniture, updated artwork, and subtle displays of affluence throughout their home. Tommy raced down the stairs, his 7-year-old energy infectious and genuine. "Grandma Rose!" he shouted, using the nickname that connected him to his great-grandmother's memory. His hug was fierce and real, untainted by the social complexities that seemed to complicate every adult interaction in this house. This pure love was why I'd come, why I endured Sarah's subtle criticisms, and why the ring in my purse felt so important. Tommy deserved to know he was cherished beyond measure. The kitchen buzzed with professional efficiency as I watched caterers arrange elaborate displays of food that would have fed my childhood neighborhood. Sarah directed traffic with the confidence of someone accustomed to managing hired help, her attention focused on presentation and impression rather than genuine celebration. "The other parents will start arriving around 2, she told me, checking her expensive watch. "Please try to mingle appropriately. These are David's colleagues and their families." The implication stung. "Behave yourself. Don't embarrass us. Pretend to be someone you're not." I nodded silently, watching Tommy play with elaborate decorations that probably cost more than most people's birthday budgets. Through the window, I saw a bouncy castle being inflated, professional entertainers setting up equipment, and a photographer checking camera angles. This birthday party had become a production, complete with staging, catering, and carefully managed guest experiences. Yet something felt hollow about the elaborate preparations, as if genuine joy had been sacrificed for social media worthiness. Tommy seemed almost overwhelmed by the scale of celebration being created around him, more excited by the cardboard box the decorations came in than the decorations themselves. His simple pleasure in small things reminded me of what birthdays used to mean. As guests began arriving, I observed the careful social dynamics Sarah had orchestrated for this gathering. Parents in expensive clothing exchanged polite conversation about private schools, vacation destinations, and career achievements, while their children gravitated toward Tommy's genuine enthusiasm for his special day. I recognized the performance aspect of adult social interaction, the subtle competition embedded in casual conversation about lifestyle choices and financial success. Sarah moved through the crowd like a graceful hostess, ensuring everyone felt welcomed and impressed by the party's elaborate presentation. She introduced me as David's mother-in-law to some guests, a technically accurate but emotionally distant description that emphasized my peripheral role in this social circle. David himself was kind, but distracted, focused on networking with his colleagues and their families, rather than celebrating his son's milestone birthday. The professional photographer captured posed moments and carefully arranged group shots, documenting the event's visual success rather than its emotional authenticity. I found myself gravitating toward Tommy and his young friends, whose unfiltered excitement about cake, games, and presents felt refreshingly genuine compared to the adult social theater surrounding them. The velvet box in my purse seemed to grow heavier as I watched this performance unfold. Tommy's friends were delightfully unimpressed by the party's expensive elements, more interested in running around the backyard and playing simple games than appreciating the elaborate entertainment Sarah had arranged. Their laughter filled spaces that the hired performers couldn't quite reach, bringing authentic joy to what had begun feeling like a carefully orchestrated social event. I joined their games, my comfortable shoes and practical clothes suddenly perfect for playground activities that required mobility rather than style. Sarah watched from the patio with other parents, her expression mixing fondness for Tommy's happiness with mild disapproval of my willingness to get grass stains on my cardigan. The children accepted me immediately, unconcerned with social hierarchies or fashion choices that seemed to matter so much to the adults surrounding them. "Grandma Rose, watch me do this," Tommy called, demonstrating a cartwheel that ended in giggles and applause from his friends. These moments felt precious and real, untouched by the complex social calculations that governed adult interactions at this gathering. I realized that Tommy's truest joy came not from expensive decorations or professional entertainment, but from attention, engagement, and people who genuinely cared about his happiness. This understanding made my gift feel even more significant. The elaborate gift table displayed an impressive array of expensive presents, each wrapped in designer paper and topped with elaborate bows that probably cost more than many people's entire gift budgets. Parents had clearly competed to demonstrate their generosity and good taste through their children's offerings to Tommy's celebration. Sarah surveyed the display with satisfaction, commenting to nearby adults about the thoughtfulness and appropriateness of various contributions to her son's birthday collection. I noticed her subtle disappointment when she spotted my modest contribution among the elaborate offerings, my simple wrapping paper and handwritten card looking humble beside professionally wrapped packages. The gift opening ceremony was scheduled for later, after cake and organized activities, giving guests time to witness and appreciate the generosity being showered upon the birthday boy. I understood the social dynamics at play. Gifts were not just presents for Tommy, but demonstrations of each family's status, taste, and understanding of appropriate social reciprocity within this particular community. My simple offering would likely be overlooked or dismissed as inadequate compared to the expensive electronics, designer clothing, and elaborate toys surrounding it. But I knew something Sarah didn't understand. The most valuable gifts can't be measured by their price tags or impressive packaging. The velvet box in my purse contained more wealth than everything on that table combined. When Sarah announced gift opening time, the adults gathered with cameras, ready to document Tommy's reactions and the generosity of their community. Tommy approached the elaborate display with 7-year-old enthusiasm, genuinely excited about each package, regardless of its size or expensive wrapping. His gracious thank you responses to each gift demonstrated the good manners Sarah and David had instilled in him, though I noticed his excitement was consistent whether he opened a $50 toy or a $300 electronic device. Sarah narrated the gift opening process, ensuring guests understood the thoughtfulness and expense involved in each offering. When Tommy reached my simple package, I felt the familiar sting of inadequacy that had been building throughout the afternoon. He unwrapped my handmade photo album filled with pictures of our special grandmother-grandson moments together, each page decorated with memories and handwritten notes about our adventures. His face lit up with genuine delight as he recognized our fishing trip photos, our baking sessions, and our walks through the neighborhood where I'd told him stories about his ancestors. Sarah's smile was polite but forced, clearly disappointed by the homemade nature of my contribution compared to the elaborate purchased gifts surrounding it. "That's very sweet, Mom," she said, with a tone that suggested sweetness wasn't quite enough for this occasion. Tommy clutched the album to his chest, genuinely moved by the memories it contained. After the gifts were opened and Tommy had been appropriately grateful for each expensive offering, I watched him return repeatedly to the photo album, showing pictures to his friends and explaining the stories behind each captured moment. His genuine connection to these shared memories stood in stark contrast to his polite but brief interest in the elaborate toys and electronic devices that had dominated the gift table. Sarah noticed his preference too, but seemed frustrated rather than pleased by his attachment to my simple, heartfelt contribution. "Tommy, put that away and play with your new toys," she suggested, trying to redirect his attention toward the expensive gifts that other parents might interpret as more appropriate entertainment for the celebration. The hired photographer continued documenting the party's success, capturing images of Tommy with his elaborate gifts that would later be shared on social media as evidence of the event's impressive execution. I realized that this birthday party had become more about Sarah's social success than Tommy's genuine happiness, more about impressing other parents than celebrating her son's milestone. The observation saddened me, but also strengthened my resolve about the gift I'd been saving for the right moment. Tommy deserved to understand that real value comes from love, family history, and connections that money cannot purchase. The velvet box seemed to pulse with anticipation in my purse. As the party wound down and guests began collecting their children and thanking Sarah for the elaborate celebration, I found myself standing alone on the patio, watching Tommy play quietly with my photo album while expensive toys lay forgotten nearby. The contrast between his genuine engagement with our shared memories and his polite disinterest in costly gifts spoke volumes about what truly mattered to a 7-year-old heart. Sarah joined me, her hostess smile finally relaxing now that her social performance was nearly complete. "Well, that went well," she said, surveying the successful execution of her elaborate party planning. Everyone seemed impressed. I nodded, understanding that impression had indeed been the primary goal of this celebration. "Tommy seemed to enjoy himself," I offered, watching my grandson trace his finger over pictures of our adventures together. Sarah's expression tightened slightly. "He needs to learn to appreciate nice things, not just sentimental stuff. David and I work hard to provide him with quality experiences and gifts." The implication was clear. My simple, heartfelt contributions were inadequate preparation for the lifestyle they wanted Tommy to expect and appreciate. I felt the familiar sting of being judged insufficient by my own daughter's social standards. But watching Tommy's continued fascination with our shared memories, I knew he understood something his parents seemed to have forgotten about genuine value. The time had come for my real gift. "Sarah, there's something I need to give Tommy," I said quietly, reaching into my purse for the velvet box that had been waiting decades for this moment. "Something important that's been in our family for generations." Sarah glanced at the small box with polite interest, probably expecting another modest contribution that would pale beside the expensive gifts her son had already received. I called Tommy over, and he came running with the photo album still clutched in his small hands, his face bright with 7-year-old curiosity about what other surprises might await him. The other parents were gradually departing, but a few lingered on the patio, probably offering final compliments about the party's impressive execution. David appeared beside Sarah, ready to begin the cleanup process and return their home to its usual sophisticated order. I knelt down to Tommy's eye level, the velvet box warm in my hands as I prepared to share a family legacy that had been waiting 67 years for this perfect recipient. "Tommy, this belonged to your great-great-grandmother Rose, the one you're named after in your nickname for me," I explained, opening the box to reveal the sapphire ring that caught the afternoon light like captured starlight. The deep blue stone seemed to glow with decades of love and family history, surrounded by diamonds that sparkled with inherited joy. Tommy's eyes widened as he stared at the ring, instinctively understanding that this was something far more significant than the elaborate toys and expensive gadgets he'd received earlier. "It's beautiful, Grandma Rose," he whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the sapphire's smooth surface. Sarah's intake of breath was sharp and audible as she recognized the ring I'd worn occasionally to special events throughout her childhood, the same ring she'd dismissed as old-fashioned when I'd offered to let her wear it to her wedding. "Mom, you can't give that to a 7-year-old, she said quickly, her voice mixing concern with something that sounded like regret. "He'll lose it or damage it. That ring belongs in a jewelry box, not with a child." David leaned closer, his financial background clearly helping him recognize the ring's substantial value, even if he couldn't know its complete worth. The remaining parents on the patio had stopped their conversations, drawn by the dramatic moment unfolding before them. I kept my focus on Tommy, who was studying the ring with the serious attention he'd given to our photo album, understanding that some things were more precious than expensive toys or elaborate entertainment. "This ring has been waiting for you, Tommy," I continued, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "It carries the love of all the women in our family who wore it before you were born. The ring is worth about $40,000, I said clearly, watching Sarah's face drain of color as the number registered with everyone within earshot. The remaining parents turned fully toward our conversation, their polite departure preparations forgotten in the face of this unexpected revelation. David's financial expertise made him the first to recover from the shock, his eyes moving between the ring and me with new understanding about family resources he'd never suspected. Sarah's mouth opened and closed without sound, her mind clearly struggling to reconcile her assumptions about my financial limitations with the reality of the valuable heirloom I'd just placed in her son's hands. Tommy continued examining the ring with careful attention, more interested in its beauty and the stories I was telling him than the dollar amount that had stunned the adults surrounding him. But its real value, I continued, is in the love it represents and the family history it carries. Your great-great-grandmother Rose worked in a factory to save money for this ring, wore it on her wedding day, and passed it down so that someday you would know you come from a family of strong, loving women who believed in lasting beauty over temporary fashion. The other parents exchanged glances, clearly reassessing their assumptions about the modest grandmother they'd barely acknowledged throughout the afternoon. Sarah's embarrassment was palpable as she realized how publicly she'd misjudged her own mother's worth and generosity. The expensive gifts on Tommy's birthday table suddenly seemed less impressive beside this family treasure. Sarah's face cycled through embarrassment, shock, and what looked like dawning horror as she realized how she'd treated me throughout Tommy's party, and indeed, throughout recent years. "Mom, I had no idea," she began, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in months. "You never said anything about having valuable jewelry or investments. I thought—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the assumptions that now seemed so foolish and hurtful in the face of this revelation. David stepped closer, his financial background making him more curious about what other assets his mother-in-law might possess that they'd never discussed or considered. The other parents watched with fascination as our family drama played out before them, probably reassessing every interaction they'd witnessed between Sarah and me throughout the afternoon. I kept my attention focused on Tommy, who was now carefully holding the ring up to the light, watching the sapphire sparkle with inherited fire. "You don't have to apologize, Sarah," I said gently. "But I hope this helps you understand that a person's worth isn't measured by their clothing choices or spending habits. Your father and I lived modestly because we believed in saving for what truly mattered: family, education, and leaving something meaningful for future generations." Tommy looked up at me with serious 7-year-old eyes. "Will you tell me more stories about great-great-grandmother Rose?" he asked, understanding intuitively that the ring connected him to ancestors whose love had shaped his existence long before his birth. The remaining parents began departing with renewed respect, several stopping to express admiration for the beautiful family heirloom and the touching gesture they'd witnessed. Their changed demeanor toward me was noticeable, their earlier polite dismissal replaced by genuine interest and warmth. Sarah stood silently beside David, both of them clearly struggling to process the revelation that had transformed their understanding of family dynamics and financial assumptions. Tommy carefully placed the ring back in its velvet box, treating it with the reverence it deserved, while maintaining his 7-year-old excitement about this special addition to his birthday celebrations. "Can I keep it in my room?" he asked, and I nodded, knowing that unlike his parents, he understood the ring's true value lay not in its price, but in the love and history it represented. "Your mom and I will help you keep it safe until you're old enough to wear it or pass it on to someone you love," I assured him. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she watched this interaction, probably remembering her own childhood when family stories and traditions had seemed more important than social status and material possessions. David put his arm around his wife, offering support as she navigated the emotional complexity of realizing how badly she'd misjudged her own mother. The afternoon had taken an unexpected turn that would reshape our family relationships in ways we were only beginning to understand. As we moved inside to continue Tommy's birthday celebration in a more intimate family setting, I noticed how the revelation of the ring's value had shifted the entire dynamic between us. Sarah's embarrassment was obvious, but so was her growing curiosity about what else she might not know about her parents' life and financial situation. "Mom, can we talk privately?" she asked, glancing toward the kitchen where we could have a moment away from Tommy's excited questions about his family heritage. David stayed with Tommy, helping him examine the ring more closely and asking thoughtful questions about our family history that demonstrated his genuine interest in understanding the legacy his son had inherited. In the kitchen, Sarah sat down heavily at her breakfast table, surrounded by the remnants of elaborate party preparations that now seemed somehow less impressive than they had a few hours earlier. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice shaking slightly with emotion and embarrassment. "I've been terrible to you, making assumptions about your finances, judging your clothes, even suggesting you were too poor to contribute meaningfully to Tommy's party. I poured us both coffee from the pot the caterers had prepared, giving her time to process the afternoon's revelations. You raised me better than this," she continued. "Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really matters and started measuring everyone by the wrong standards." The kitchen felt peaceful after the elaborate social performance of the afternoon, creating space for honest conversation between mother and daughter. "Sarah, wealth isn't always visible," I said gently, sitting across from her at the table where we'd shared so many conversations throughout her childhood. "Your father and I chose to live modestly, not because we had to, but because we believed in saving for what truly mattered. We wanted to leave you and Tommy something more valuable than expensive clothes or fancy cars." I explained about the investment accounts Robert had carefully built over decades, the life insurance policies that had provided financial security after his death, and the savings bonds we'd purchased in Tommy's name since his birth. Sarah's eyes widened as she began to understand the scope of financial resources her parents had quietly accumulated while living in the same modest home and maintaining the same simple lifestyle she'd begun to find embarrassing. "But why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked. "Why let me think you were struggling financially?" I smiled, remembering Robert's wisdom about money and family relationships. "Because we wanted you to love us for who we were, not what we had," I explained. "And we wanted to teach you that real security comes from living within your means, saving for the future, and investing in relationships rather than impressing people with expensive possessions." The irony wasn't lost on either of us that my simple lifestyle had been a choice rather than a necessity, while her expensive tastes were straining their actual budget despite David's good income. Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway, still carrying his velvet box and the photo album, his face bright with questions about the family stories both gifts represented. "Grandma Rose, will you tell me about great-great-grandmother Rose while I look at the ring?" he asked, climbing onto the chair beside me with 7-year-old determination to learn more about his heritage. Sarah watched as I began sharing stories about his ancestors' strength, determination, and love for family that had enabled her to save money for the ring, despite working in difficult conditions during the 1920s. Tommy listened with rapt attention, periodically opening the velvet box to examine the sapphire, while I described how his great-great-grandmother had worn it on her wedding day, then carefully preserved it for future generations. David joined us in the kitchen, drawn by the family storytelling that was creating connections between past and present in ways that morning's elaborate party preparations never could have achieved. "These are the stories that matter," I told Tommy, watching him trace the ring's setting with careful fingers. "This is your inheritance. Not just a valuable ring, but the knowledge that you come from people who loved you before you were born, who worked hard to create something lasting, and who believe that family connections are more precious than any material possession." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she listened to stories about her grandmother that she'd forgotten or never fully appreciated during her own childhood. The kitchen had become a classroom where 3 generations were reconnecting around values that expensive parties couldn't purchase or demonstrate. David's questions about our family history revealed genuine interest in understanding the legacy Tommy had inherited, both in terms of material value and family traditions that connected him to ancestors he'd never meet. "How long has the ring been in your family?" he asked, and I explained the chain of inheritance that had brought it to this moment when it would pass to the 5th generation. Sarah listened quietly as I described her own grandmother's stories about Rose, the factory worker who had saved coins for months to afford the sapphire that would represent her love for decades to come. "I remember some of these stories from when I was little," Sarah said slowly, "but I'd forgotten how important they were to you and Dad." Tommy's fascination with the ring and the stories it represented demonstrated that 7-year-olds could understand the concept of inherited love even when adults sometimes forgot its value. "Can we visit great-great-grandmother Rose's grave?" Tommy asked, and I promised we'd make that trip soon, bringing flowers and stories to share with his ancestor. The afternoon had evolved from an elaborate social performance into an intimate family gathering that felt more like the birthday celebrations of my childhood, filled with genuine connection rather than impressive displays. David suggested we preserve some of these family stories in writing, creating a legacy document that would accompany the ring as it continued its journey through future generations. Sarah nodded enthusiastically, clearly understanding now that family heritage was worth preserving and celebrating. As evening approached and the elaborate party decorations were packed away, our small family group had settled into the living room, where Tommy continued examining his ring while asking questions about each ancestor who had worn it before him. The expensive toys from his birthday morning remained largely untouched, while he focused on the two gifts that connected him to family love and history, the photo album and the sapphire ring. Sarah had changed from her expensive party dress into comfortable clothes, symbolically shedding the social performance that had dominated the afternoon in favor of genuine family time. David helped Tommy research the ring's historical period on his tablet, looking up fashion from the 1920s and discussing how different life had been for his great-great-grandmother. She would be so happy to know her ring was going to someone who appreciates its stories, I told Tommy, watching him hold the sapphire up to the lamplight once more. Sarah sat beside me on the couch, physically closer than she'd been in months, the afternoon's revelations having broken down barriers that expensive gifts and elaborate parties never could have addressed. "I want to learn more about our family history," she said quietly. "I want Tommy to grow up understanding where he comes from and what really matters." The transformation in our relationship felt as significant as the ring's presentation, suggesting that sometimes family conflicts could become opportunities for deeper connection when addressed with honesty and love. The next morning, Sarah called while I was having breakfast, her voice different than it had been in recent months, warmer, more humble, and genuinely interested in rebuilding our relationship. "Mom, I've been thinking all night about yesterday and how badly I've behaved toward you," she began. "I want to make things right between us, but I also want to understand more about Dad's investments and the financial planning you two did that I never knew about." I appreciated her honesty and her willingness to acknowledge mistakes that had been building between us for several years. We arranged to meet for lunch that afternoon, just the two of us, to have the honest conversation we should have had long ago about money, values, and family relationships. "I also want to learn more about our family history," she continued. "Tommy hasn't stopped talking about great-great-grandmother Rose, and I realized I've forgotten so many stories that you and Dad used to tell me when I was his age." Her genuine interest in reconnecting with family traditions felt like a gift more valuable than any expensive jewelry. I suggested we start by going through old photo albums and family documents together, creating a comprehensive family history that Tommy could treasure alongside his inherited ring. "And Mom," she added, her voice soft with emotion, "I'm sorry I was embarrassed by your clothes and your modest lifestyle. I understand now that you were teaching me something important that I was too focused on appearances to appreciate." That afternoon's lunch conversation marked the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship, one built on honesty rather than assumptions and mutual respect rather than social judgments. Sarah listened intently as I explained the investment strategy Robert and I had followed throughout our marriage, prioritizing long-term financial security over immediate gratification or impressive displays of wealth. "We wanted to leave you and Tommy something substantial," I explained. "But we also wanted to model the kind of fiscal responsibility that creates real security rather than the appearance of success." She acknowledged that her own spending patterns had been influenced more by social pressure and the desire to fit into David's professional circle than by sound financial planning or genuine needs. "David and I need to reassess our priorities," she admitted. "We've been spending money to impress people instead of building the kind of secure foundation you and Dad created." I shared some of Robert's practical wisdom about budgeting, saving, and distinguishing between wants and needs that had guided our financial decisions for decades. Sarah took notes, genuinely interested in applying these principles to her own family's financial planning. "I want Tommy to inherit the same kind of security you're providing," she said. But I also want him to understand that real wealth comes from family love, not expensive possessions. Our conversation felt like a reconciliation and a new beginning, built on shared values we'd temporarily forgotten, but could now rebuild together. Tommy's fascination with his ring and our family stories continued throughout the following weeks, transforming our regular visits into opportunities for deeper connection and historical education. He wore the ring on special occasions, treating it with the reverence it deserved while thoroughly enjoying its beauty and significance. Sarah began joining these storytelling sessions, rediscovering family history she'd forgotten and asking questions that helped all of us understand our heritage more completely. David contributed by researching historical contexts and helping Tommy understand the time periods when his ancestors had lived and worked. The photo album I'd created became a treasured reference document as Tommy identified people in old family pictures and learned their stories. "I want to make a photo album like this for my kids someday," he announced one afternoon, already thinking about how he would pass along family traditions to future generations. Sarah and David had begun implementing some of the financial strategies Robert and I had used, focusing more on long-term security and less on immediate gratification or social impressions. "We've started a college fund for Tommy," Sarah told me proudly, "and we're paying down our credit card debt instead of buying things we don't really need." The changes in their spending habits were subtle but significant, reflecting a shift in values that had been prompted by our honest conversations about money, family, and what truly matters. Tommy's birthday had become a catalyst for positive changes that continued rippling through our family relationships. 6 months later, Tommy's teacher called to tell me about a presentation he'd given to his second-grade class about family heritage, featuring the sapphire ring and stories about great-great-grandmother Rose that had captivated his classmates and their parents. "He spoke with such pride about his family history," she said, "and the other children were fascinated by the ring and the stories it represents." Tommy had become the family historian, remembering details about ancestors I'd forgotten and asking thoughtful questions about family traditions he wanted to preserve and pass along. Sarah had embraced her role as the bridge between generations, helping Tommy understand complex family relationships while rediscovering her own connection to our heritage. David surprised us all by researching genealogy resources and creating a family tree that traced our lineage back several additional generations beyond what we'd previously known. "I want Tommy to understand the full scope of his inheritance," he explained, "both the material legacy and the family traditions that shaped who he is." The ring had become a symbol not just of inherited wealth, but of family continuity and love that connected past, present, and future in ways that mere money never could. Sarah's relationship with me had been permanently transformed by our honest conversations about values, priorities, and the difference between appearance and substance. Our weekly visits now included regular discussions about family history, financial planning, and the kind of legacy we wanted to create for Tommy and his future children. Tommy's 8th birthday approached with very different planning than his elaborate 7th birthday party had involved. Sarah and David decided on a simple backyard celebration focused on family and close friends rather than social impressions and expensive entertainment. "Last year was about showing off," Sarah admitted, as we planned the modest gathering. "This year is about celebrating Tommy and the family connections that really matter to him." The guest list included grandparents, aunts, uncles, and a few school friends, people who genuinely cared about Tommy. Rather than parents, Sarah wanted to impress with elaborate party planning. Tommy himself preferred the simpler approach, more interested in spending quality time with loved ones than being the center of an expensive production. "Can we look at family pictures during the party?" he asked, suggesting we create a display of historical family photos alongside his current birthday pictures. Sarah embraced this idea enthusiastically, understanding now that family traditions and stories were more valuable entertainment than hired performers or elaborate decorations. David contributed by creating a slideshow that included historical family photos, Tommy's baby pictures, and images from our recent family adventures together. The planned party felt more authentic and personally meaningful than the previous year's elaborate social performance. I looked forward to celebrating with family members who valued connection over impression, love over luxury, and genuine joy over social media documentation. Tommy's simple request to wear his ring during the party demonstrated his continued appreciation for family heritage over expensive presents. The simple 8th birthday party exceeded our expectations in ways the elaborate 7th birthday celebration never could have achieved. Tommy wore his sapphire ring proudly while showing family photos to his school friends, explaining the stories behind historical images with 7-year-old enthusiasm for his heritage. Sarah had prepared homemade cake using her grandmother's recipe, creating edible connections to family traditions rather than impressive displays of purchased perfection. David set up outdoor games that encouraged genuine interaction and laughter rather than passive entertainment consumption. The slideshow of family photos sparked conversations between generations as relatives shared additional stories and memories that enriched our collective understanding of family history. Tommy's school friends were genuinely interested in the family stories and historical photos, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated children's natural fascination with family heritage when presented authentically. "This is so much more fun than last year," Tommy announced during cake time, his observation validating our shift toward values-based celebration over expensive performance. Sarah's happiness seemed more genuine too, based on meaningful connections rather than social impressions or party planning success. The gathering felt relaxed and authentic, filled with real laughter and spontaneous moments that couldn't be choreographed or purchased. Even the cleanup was enjoyable, with family members working together while continuing conversations that had been sparked by shared photos and stories. Tommy's request to keep some family photos in his room demonstrated his growing connection to ancestors whose love had shaped his existence long before his birth. As Tommy entered 3rd grade, his teachers continued to comment on his unusual sophistication regarding family history and his genuine appreciation for heritage and tradition. The sapphire ring had become a regular part of his school presentations about family traditions, historical periods, and the concept of inherited wealth that extends beyond material possessions. His classmates regularly asked to see the ring and hear stories about great-great-grandmother Rose, demonstrating that children instinctively understand the value of family connections when presented authentically rather than as abstract concepts. Sarah had begun volunteering in Tommy's classroom, sharing family photos and stories that enriched social studies lessons about historical periods and immigration patterns. "Mrs. Johnson says Tommy has a special understanding of how families connect across generations," Sarah told me proudly after a parent-teacher conference. David had started a college savings account that would grow alongside Tommy's appreciation for education and financial responsibility, ensuring that his inheritance would include both material security and practical wisdom about money management. The transformation in our family relationships continued expanding as Tommy's cousins became interested in their own family heritage, inspiring broader conversations about traditions worth preserving and values worth passing along to future generations. Sarah's relationship with money had fundamentally changed as she embraced the financial principles Robert and I had modeled throughout our marriage, focusing on long-term security rather than immediate gratification or social impressions. Our weekly family dinners had become treasured opportunities for storytelling, financial education, and planning adventures that would create new memories while honoring family traditions. Tommy looked forward to these gatherings as chances to wear his ring while learning about ancestors whose strength and love had created the foundation for his secure childhood. Sarah had begun cooking some of her grandmother's recipes, creating edible connections to family history while teaching Tommy about the practical skills his ancestors had used to create stability during challenging times. David contributed financial literacy discussions appropriate for Tommy's age, helping him understand concepts like saving, investing, and the difference between needs and wants that would serve him throughout his life. "I want to be like great-great-grandmother Rose," Tommy announced one evening. "I want to work hard and save money for something special that I can give to my kids someday." His 8-year-old understanding of long-term thinking and family responsibility demonstrated that children could grasp sophisticated concepts about legacy and inheritance when presented through loving family stories rather than abstract lessons. These dinner conversations had replaced the tense interactions that had characterized our relationship before Tommy's 7th birthday, creating new traditions that honored our heritage while building stronger connections between present and future. The sapphire ring sparkled on Tommy's finger during these discussions, a tangible reminder of the love that connected him to ancestors he would never meet, but whose influence shaped his daily life in countless positive ways. Sarah's friendships had evolved as she embraced authenticity over social performance, attracting people who valued genuine connection rather than impressive displays of wealth or status. Her new approach to relationships mirrored the changes in our family dynamics, prioritizing substance over surface and long-term compatibility over short-term social advantages. "I've realized that the people worth knowing don't judge you by your clothes or your car," she told me during one of our regular coffee dates. "The friends who matter appreciate honesty, kindness, and genuine interest in their lives rather than competition about lifestyle choices." David's colleagues had noticed changes in his family's approach to social events and spending patterns, with several expressing curiosity about the financial strategies that enabled such confident simplicity. Tommy's school friends continued gravitating toward our house for playdates and birthday parties, drawn by the authentic warmth and genuine attention they received rather than elaborate entertainment or expensive activities. "Tommy's house is my favorite," one of his classmates told Sarah. "His grandma tells the best stories and they have the coolest old pictures and jewelry." The child's observation validated our emphasis on family heritage and authentic relationships over material impressions and expensive diversions. Sarah had begun sharing some of Robert's financial wisdom with other parents who struggled with balancing social expectations and practical budgeting, creating helpful conversations about values-based decision-making rather than competitive spending patterns. Our family's transformation had become quietly influential within our community, as people recognized the peace and security that came from aligning spending habits with genuine values rather than social pressures. Tommy's 9th birthday party planning began 6 months in advance, with his enthusiastic participation in creating a celebration that would honor family traditions while incorporating his growing understanding of financial responsibility. "Can we have a potluck dinner instead of hiring caterers?" he suggested, understanding that shared contributions often created more meaningful gatherings than purchased services. Sarah embraced this idea wholeheartedly, recognizing that collaborative celebrations built stronger community connections while demonstrating practical values about resource sharing and collective effort. David contributed planning skills he'd developed through his financial background, helping Tommy create a budget for decorations and activities that would teach him about balancing wants and needs within reasonable spending limits. "I want to use some of my allowance money to buy ingredients for great-grandmother's cake recipe," Tommy announced, demonstrating his growing understanding of personal financial contribution to family celebrations. The planning process had become as valuable as the party itself, providing opportunities for Tommy to practice decision-making skills, budgeting concepts, and collaborative planning that would serve him throughout his life. Sarah documented these planning discussions, creating another photo album that would preserve memories of Tommy's developing maturity and family engagement alongside pictures of the actual celebration. The ring remained central to Tommy's identity and special occasions, but now it was accompanied by practical life skills and values-based decision-making that enhanced its symbolic importance. David had begun teaching Tommy about investment concepts appropriate for his age, using concrete examples and simple calculations that made abstract financial concepts accessible to 9-year-old understanding. The sapphire ring had traveled with us on family vacations, creating opportunities for Tommy to share family stories with extended relatives while learning about different branches of his family tree. During a visit to my sister's house in Colorado, Tommy proudly showed the ring to his great-aunt Martha, who shared additional stories about great-great-grandmother Rose that I'd never heard before. Rose used to say that jewelry should be worn and enjoyed, not hidden away in boxes, Martha told Tommy. She would be so happy to know that her ring is being loved and appreciated by someone who understands its real value. These extended family connections had enriched Tommy's understanding of his heritage while creating new relationships that would support him throughout his life. Sarah documented these visits with photographs and written notes, building comprehensive family records that would preserve stories and connections for future generations. David had begun researching genealogy resources more seriously, discovering additional family history that connected Tommy to ancestors in different countries and time periods. "Your family tree has roots in Ireland, Germany, and Poland," he told Tommy during one of our research sessions. "Each branch of your family contributed something special to who you are today." Tommy's fascination with these discoveries had sparked interest in geography, history, and cultural traditions that enhanced his education while strengthening his sense of identity and belonging. The ring served as a tangible connection to this expanding understanding of family heritage, representing not just one ancestor's love, but the accumulated wisdom and strength of multiple generations who had contributed to his secure and loving childhood. Tommy's fourth-grade teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had incorporated his family stories into several class projects, recognizing the educational value of authentic family history in teaching broader concepts about immigration, economic development, and social change throughout American history. Tommy's presentations about his great-great-grandmother help other students understand how individual families experienced historical events, she explained during a parent conference. His ring and family photos make abstract historical concepts concrete and personally meaningful for 9-year-olds. Tommy's classmates had begun sharing their own family stories and heirlooms, creating a classroom culture that valued heritage and family connections rather than focusing exclusively on contemporary experiences and material possessions. Sarah volunteered regularly in the classroom, contributing family artifacts and stories that enriched social studies lessons while strengthening her relationship with Tommy's educational experience. David had started a financial literacy program for interested parents, sharing practical budgeting and investment strategies that could help families build long-term security rather than struggling with month-to-month financial stress. "So many parents want to provide financial security for their children, but don't know where to start," he observed. Robert's approaches to saving and investing offer practical solutions that any family can implement regardless of their current income level. The program had become popular within the school community, creating connections between families who shared values about financial responsibility and long-term planning rather than competitive spending or social impressions. Tommy participated in these discussions when appropriate, sharing his 9-year-old understanding of saving money and making thoughtful choices about spending that impressed adults with his maturity and practical wisdom. Our family's commitment to preserving and sharing family history had attracted attention from local historical societies interested in documenting immigrant experiences and family traditions that illustrated broader patterns of American social and economic development. A local museum curator contacted Sarah about potentially displaying some of our family artifacts and photographs as part of an exhibit about working-class families who achieved economic stability through careful planning and family cooperation. "Your family's story illustrates important themes about financial literacy, family values, and the American dream that would resonate with museum visitors," the curator explained. Tommy was excited about the possibility of sharing great-great-grandmother Rose's story with a broader audience, understanding that his family's experience might inspire other families to appreciate their own heritage and develop stronger financial planning habits. Sarah had begun writing more detailed family histories, combining my memories with research David had conducted and stories that emerged during visits with extended family members. "I want to create a comprehensive record that Tommy can pass along to his children," she explained. "Not just stories about individual ancestors, but documentation of the values and strategies that created stability and security across multiple generations." The writing project had become a family collaboration, with Tommy contributing his own observations and questions that helped Sarah identify important themes and details that might otherwise be overlooked. David provided organizational structure and research assistance that ensured accuracy and completeness in the historical record they were creating together. The sapphire ring remained central to these documentation efforts, serving as both inspiration and symbol for the family legacy they were preserving for future generations. Tommy's 10th birthday marked a decade of growth that had been shaped profoundly by his inheritance of the sapphire ring and the family values it represented. The celebration reflected our family's evolution toward authentic relationships and values-based decisions, featuring homemade food, meaningful gifts, and activities that strengthened family connections rather than impressive displays of wealth or social status. Tommy wore his ring throughout the party, proudly sharing family stories with friends and relatives who had become accustomed to his sophisticated understanding of heritage and tradition. Sarah had compiled a new photo album documenting Tommy's growth alongside the ring, creating visual evidence of how family heirlooms could enhance rather than burden childhood development when presented with appropriate context and genuine love. David contributed a presentation about Tommy's college savings account, explaining how consistent small contributions had grown into substantial educational funding that would provide security and opportunity without creating debt or financial stress. Tommy understands that his inheritance includes both material resources and practical knowledge about managing money responsibly, David told assembled family members. He's learning to appreciate both the gifts he's received and the responsibility that comes with family wealth. The party's highlight was Tommy's own presentation about great-great-grandmother Rose, featuring historical photographs, family artifacts, and stories he'd collected during 4 years of research and family conversations. His 10-year-old understanding of historical context, economic concepts, and family dynamics impressed adults while inspiring younger cousins to become interested in their own family heritage and traditions. The celebration concluded with Tommy carefully returning the ring to its velvet box, treating it with the same reverence he'd shown since that transformative 7th birthday, when it had changed our family's understanding of value, worth, and genuine treasure. Looking back on the 3 years since Tommy's 7th birthday, I marvel at the transformation that one moment of honesty created within our family relationships. The sapphire ring had served as a catalyst for conversations about values, priorities, and the difference between appearance and substance that might never have occurred without that dramatic revelation. Sarah's relationship with money, family, and social expectations had fundamentally changed as she embraced the financial wisdom Robert and I had practiced throughout our marriage, creating security and peace that competitive spending and social performance could never provide. Tommy's development had been enriched by his connection to family heritage and his growing understanding of financial responsibility, practical wisdom, and the love that connects generations across time and circumstances. David's integration into our family traditions had strengthened as he contributed research skills, financial knowledge, and genuine enthusiasm for preserving and sharing family history with future generations. Our weekly family dinners, regular storytelling sessions, and collaborative planning for birthdays and holidays had created new traditions that honored our heritage while building stronger connections between present and future. The ring continued to sparkle on special occasions, worn by a young man who understood that its true value lay not in its impressive monetary worth, but in the love, sacrifice, and careful planning that had preserved it for his generation. Sarah's initial embarrassment about my modest lifestyle had evolved into genuine appreciation for the financial security and family values that simple living had enabled us to build and maintain across multiple decades. Our story had become an example within our community of how honest communication, shared values, and authentic relationships could transform family dynamics while creating lasting security and happiness for everyone involved.